Good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's HIS Talk webinar. The title of the webinar is Full Speed Ahead, Creating Go Live Success, and it is supported by Encore Health Resources. I'm Lori from HIS Talk, and I will be monitoring today. Attendee phone lines have been muted to prevent background noise. You can use GoToWebinar's questions box in the console to submit questions to our presenter at any time. The presenter will answer your questions during the Q&A at the end. If we run out of time, the unanswered questions and responses will be sent to all attendees in our follow-up email. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll also receive a link to view it in the same email. Today's presenter is Dr. William Sangster, Physician Services Consultant at Encore. Dr. Sangster is a physician and surgeon and has more than 30 years healthcare experience. He has a background in analyzing electronic health record and computerized physician order entry systems and has designed and integrated IT systems to achieve measurable improvements in patient safety. But before I turn it over to Dr. Sangster, Mr. HIS Talk has something to say about our topic today. Mr. H?
Muted.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks, Dr. Bill and the Encore folks for being here with us today. They say that smells elicit the strongest memories, and when I think of the go-lives that I've been involved with, and I still call them go-lives, I know activations is the more current terminology, but when I think through those, I can smell the IT war room, the conference room that you get stuck in over the weekend that smells like leftover garlic bagels and pizza. Everybody's laptop's overheated, and then every now and then you get that panic sweat from the regular feeling that you're losing the control of what you've worked so long to put together. I've never seen a go-live where the hospital had enough people or had done enough training or had managed to get everybody on board who needed to be, all the physicians and employees. You just set a date, take the leap of faith. You know it's going to hurt, but you also know that you'll get through it. So as we IT people figured out, you can't let perfection get in the way of good enough. On the go-live day, it's guaranteed that the friendly users that you had are going to hate you for a little bit of that time. The critics of your old system will complain loudly that the new one isn't just like that one was, and all the folks who voted to buy the new system either disappear or disavow their involvement. That's just the way it goes. It's an IT problem on go-live day. But as IT people, we have to plan carefully, get help from anybody and everybody who can help us get that bolus of go-live work done, and then importantly, celebrate our accomplishments before we move on to the next project, even if we're the only ones celebrating. You may not bond with your users on Go Live Day, but you'll probably bond with each other. Thanks again for joining us today, and I will now turn it over to Dr. Sangster.
Thank you very much. Sounds like we've been at the same Go Lives. And for some reason, I'm having trouble making this work. Oh, great. Hang on. You should know it that my computer has frozen up here. Let's see. There we go. I apologize. We're ready to go. Okay, here's today's agenda. We're going to talk about Go Live success considerations, lessons learned from previous projects, and a little bit later about Encore Health Resources activation services. Here are the stated objectives of today's session, but what I mainly want to do is share suggestions for Go Live that we've gathered from lessons learned, and to tell you a little bit, as I said later, about our activation support services. So leading up to Go Live, as you're getting ready, you've begun your presentation, your preparation with all the normal planning activities, and you've done your design, build, and test activities. But to get across the finish line, you'll need a good Go Live strategy. Training is obviously hugely important. And in addition to just training, we think it's very beneficial to require some form of proficiency evaluation when training is complete. This could be in the form of a test or simply a demonstration from the student to the trainer that they understand what they have been taught. But I think it's really important to actually insist upon some proficiency evaluation. If at all possible, to provide opportunities for physicians to continue to practice what they learned in training, because some of them will have trained well in advance of go live, so a trained domain or a play domain is very helpful. And most important, and what we're going to talk about today, obviously, is you'll need a comprehensive go live support strategy to be successful. So here's some things that we have learned. Changing how physicians order changes everything. It isn't simply a different way of entering orders, but everybody's workflow changes. One example of this was an organization that had computerized orders for some time, but assumed that simply changing from unit clerk order entry to physician order entry would not change other people's workflow. That was unfortunate. They offered no more than an hour of training to nurses for CPOE, and after go live, there were numerous instances of nurses missing orders because they hadn't been trained in how their workflow would change. So it's really important to understand that it isn't just the physician's workflow that's going to change, it's everyone's. Expectation management is key. It's important to set appropriate expectations. The expectation should be that things will be hard. Work will be slower. It's wise to plan for this by decreasing the number of patient visits in an ambulatory setting or scheduling fewer OR cases or scheduled admissions in the inpatient setting, if at all possible. Clearly, it's easier to do in an ambulatory setting than inpatient, but whenever possible, if you can set the expectation that you won't be able to get the same amount of work done until you become more familiar with the system. Getting physicians involved in design, build, test, and training lead to better engagement in adoption when it is something that they are a part of rather than something that is being done to them, which is what they frequently feel. Then they are more likely to accept the changes that they will have to make. We all know that CPOE improves patient safety and operational outcomes. Physicians will grudgingly admit to these positives. However, they're often surprised to learn that they can become more efficient in their daily lives as well. I've had many physicians tell me that they can take care of patients much more efficiently after going live with CPOE, and that they would hate to go back to paper resources. And interestingly, surprisingly, some of those folks are the ones who said that they would go kicking and screaming into CPOE. We also feel that just-in-time support provided early reduces the learning curve. Here's an example from a large academic medical center of what we would call an adoption-focused implementation. As you can see from the first three lines, there was significant physician involvement in design validation, build testing, and training. But what I'd like you to focus on is the degree of physician involvement in post-training support and go-live support, which is really quite extraordinary. Post-training workshops, or some people call them optimization workshops, allow physicians to get help in setting up favorites and other things that will improve their efficiency after go-live. These are sessions or labs that can be made available outside the normal prescribed training schedule, where they can come in afterwards, practice a little bit, and get ready for go-live. Go-live support, especially the number of actual physicians who were involved in the support, is truly impressive. The successes achieved by these methods have led us to believe that this is the recommended way to do things. When I was a relative newcomer to Encore and I was going to be having a group come and help with go-live support for the client that I was working with, and they said, we'll bring 25 to 30 physicians. My comment was something along the lines of, what parallel universe are you working in that you're going to be able to get 30 physicians to come and help with go-live? But it actually occurred, and as you see at this academic center, 25 to 30 physicians showed up to help us, and it was probably the thing that got us over the line as much as anything. Go Live is definitely bigger than you think. There is never enough communication that can be done. There's never enough planning. There's always more to do. Never underestimate physician support needs. What I mean by this is that just having bodies allocated to support physicians is not enough. You need the right kind of bodies. The ability to actually have physicians as part of the support team helps in several ways. Physicians are just trying to get through their day, so the first few days of Go Live are really stressful to them because their day is already slowed down. Being able to explain to another physician just what it is the physician is trying to do can often lead to alternative suggestions of how to accomplish it rather than sticking to the method taught in training. Training is frequently feature function oriented and not workflow oriented, and it's sometimes hard for the physicians to extract from their brain what they learned in training when they really are just able to want to communicate, this is what I want to do. And having another doc there to help is very helpful. Train, train, train. Obviously, you can never train too much before Go Live. And I would add here that we feel strongly that training has to be mandatory. There has to be some accountability that everyone will train. But even with that, you'll find that you will need to have training available for folks who somehow slipped through the scheduled training for one reason or another, or for folks who show up new on the job that haven't gone through the training otherwise. When I'm talking about support, we're talking about just-in-time, at-the-elbow support to bring to these folks to help get them through that particular patient care instance that they're working on. Then to, within the next day or two, be sure that they get into regular training sessions as soon as possible. So being able to provide training and help for the immediate time and then getting them to formal training is very key. Staffing and scheduling is critical. It's important to know well in advance what resources will be available and when, obviously, and those resources need to have defined roles, responsibilities, and expectations. It's frequently difficult but very important to negotiate the commitments for the support staff, especially super users. Very often the organization will say, yes, we'll have X amount of super users available, but as soon as things get busy, they get sucked back into direct patient care and not being able to be used in their support role. So it's difficult to do, but having those super users committed for the entire length of the Go Live period is very important. Super users are critical because having individuals on the units who are familiar with the physicians who work in that unit and who understand the workflow of the unit bring tremendous value. Being able to talk to a nurse that you trust and have worked with for a long period of time who can help you out makes things a lot easier. What we mean by the support grows in maturity over time is that the questions asked in weeks 2 and 3 are much different than those asked in week 1. They change from how do I log on, and I can't remember how they said to do X, Y, or Z training. And they change to I can't find a certain lab order that I need. Then even later it becomes show me how to create an order for the special wound care that I always use, or I want to order a special type of TPN, not the standard. So the needs in the first week are completely different from those that the physicians need later on, and it's important to be able to plan ahead for that change. Just a few comments here about the differences or sometimes similarities of supporting Go Lives in ambulatory settings and inpatient settings. In the inpatient area, one thing that is bitten us in the rear end more than once is the fact that areas like interventional radiology or cath lab frequently aren't considered when the initial plan is put together, because the planners have just looked at how many do we need to have on 3 North, how many do we need to have on 4 South. So some of the ancillary areas get short shrift, and then you have to scramble to find support for them. An important thing to remember in the ambulatory setting, I think, is that the entire office workflow has changed, not just for the physicians, but for the front office and nursing staff as well. And also, don't forget that the physician's stay in the office doesn't end when the last patient goes out the door, but they have other things that they need to finish up on or to complete. So you need to plan the support that extends beyond scheduled hours. Some issues are common to both areas. There will, unfortunately, likely be instances of physicians who act out or who want to express their frustration in both settings. There needs to be a well-thought-out plan of how the organization will deal with these types of issues in advance of go live so that they can be dealt with rapidly and effectively. The life cycle of support starts with pre-go live planning. Besides assessing your training strategy, rolling out repeatable processes, and providing extensive go-live training, we feel that it is highly advantageous to partner with a knowledgeable organization to help you with go-live support. There are a number of companies with experience in this area, and the investment, we feel, will be well worth it. It's important to identify both super users who will be giving physician support as well as identifying physician champions. The champions will likely have been involved in the project as you've gone along with planning, build, etc., but they can play an important role in the go-live strategy as well. Another important thing to do is to create a physician resource center. What I mean by this is it's very helpful to have an area outside of normal patient care areas where physicians may come to get additional support or ask more detailed questions than they might have time to ask when they're rounding on the floor. It creates a quieter, less stressful place to get questions answered than out on the floors. Doctor's dining rooms or physician lounges are possible locations for this function. At our last go live, there was a physician resource center set up in the back of the physician dining room that actually was probably busy almost all day long every day with docs who either wanted to drop in there before they went on rounds or who would come back in and ask specific questions that had come up while they were rounding. The go-live support is meant to be just in time, at the elbow support, tailored to the needs of the physician at the moment that he needs it. Some physician presence is also helpful in the command center to allow for physician input to issues called into the command center. I spent a lot of my time in the command center trying to interpret for the 40-some-odd tech IT folks who were sitting there what the doctor on the line was actually trying to tell them. So that's important. Also keep in mind that most training focuses on generic internal medicine workflow or generic surgery workflow, and there will be specialists who will need specific help and mentoring with the workflows that they need to carry out. And finally, I think it's real important to monitor almost on a daily basis what go-live lessons learned have been. We actually set up a huddle every day in the afternoon for the physicians who were doing support to come in and discuss so that everybody could know what they were dealing with, the issues that had come up over the past 24 hours. This obviously helped to communicate to others what needed to be stressed, but also gave some keys as to things that needed to be tweaked in the system even as we went along. The key thing, I think, here is to train the at-the-elbow support in your build and in your culture and workflow. The folks that come to help you will be familiar with whatever EHR system you have, but as we all know, if you've seen one Cerner or Epic or Meditech build, you've seen one Cerner or Epic or Meditech build. Yours will be different than any that they have seen before, so take the time to train them in your way of doing things. Also, support needs to be scheduled around needs and volume. If your busiest OR day is Tuesday, put additional help there on Tuesday, and if the ED is busiest from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m., be sure to have adequate support staff to cover that time period as well. As far as managing the support team, I will discuss that toward the end of the talk in more detail, but suffice it to say that someone must take the responsibility for go live from start to finish, and trust me, it is a 24/7 job. Key things that we have found repeatable that physicians need help with, and these probably will come as no great shock to any of you, but the first is just personalization, taking the order sets that they commonly use and selecting the appropriate orders and saving it as a favorite, setting up documentation templates for the things that they commonly do, and saving preference lists for labs and imaging studies that they commonly order. So just getting preferences basically set up so that the workflow is personalized for the physicians. MedRec is always difficult, even under the best of circumstances, but physicians will need help not just with how to do it, meaning what's the functionality that I use in this system to do medication reconciliation, but when to do it. Is it better to do admission MedRec while I'm doing the admission orders, or is it better to do it after the patient's already gotten to the floor? Do surgeons need to do MedRec each time they operate on the patient before they go back to the floor? In some cases, this may partly be due to the organization's rules and regs, but obviously it's pretty well set as to when you should do it from the regulatory standpoint. But in the workflow frame, I think that it's sometimes difficult for the docs to figure out when the best time to do it. And unfortunately, there will also be plenty of people who will be trying to understand why they have to do it in the first place. So being familiar with the reasons to do MedRec will help the support folks with that. ED admissions are always problematic. Questions like who places the orders, the ED physician or the admitting physician? Are there holding orders that need to be put in place? What happens when there's no bed immediately available on the floor? Does the patient stay in the ED, but their admission orders have already begun to be active? Lots of questions that come up around process concerning ED admissions. And unfortunately, frequently, most of the questions arise at night when you may not have the amount of support that you would during the day. Procedure documentation and just finding patient information in the chart is always difficult for folks while they're getting started, and seems to come up with every go live and is important to plan for. Now let's talk a little bit about super users. For generally, the people that end up being super users are nurse or non-physician resources who have familiarity with the work on a given unit, but they need to have extensive training before go live in the physician workflow as well if they're going to be helping physicians. It seems fairly intuitive, but sometimes it is a surprise to me that that isn't done. Clearly, they have to be available during go live, and it's also very helpful if they can remain available afterwards in the support role, even after they have gone back to their usual patient care responsibilities. If there's someone on the unit that everybody knows, is the super user that can help out, that becomes very helpful. During go live, super users must be released from their regular responsibilities. Obviously, that's easier to do in theory, and every place we've gone so far at the organization has said, yes, we absolutely intend to do that. But then, little by little, they seem to get drawn back into normal patient care activities. But as much as possible, as much as feasible, these folks need to be out of the numbers, and the positions that they have left need to be backfilled and budgeted for. That is probably the biggest reason why it's difficult to do, because the folks in the front office have difficulty with that backfill and budgeting part of it. Go live communication. Everybody expects problems, and you clearly have to communicate problems, but I think it's really important also to report progress. One of the things we found helpful at the go live that we recently did was to begin each meeting with an update on the % of orders that were being placed into the computer to follow the trend. And obviously, it gradually went up over time. But don't just start with all the glitches that have occurred and all the problems and fires that you're trying to stamp out, but try to point out successes. Maybe even bring an example of a story of a physician who was having trouble and kind of had the aha moment and got it. Try to bring some positivity to the communications. Important things about communications. Leadership needs to be communicated with on a regular basis, and they need to be visible when other communication is going on. I think it's very important to have a daily update, at least during the week, with the C-suite to let them know how things are going. Having a dedicated communication vehicle is important, like a daily newsletter of things that have been changed in the system or things that occurred over the night shift that need to be brought up during the day. We'll talk a little bit, well, actually, I'm sorry, the next bullet talks about shift change meetings. As the preceding group of support people are going off and the new group is coming in, we like to have the entire support team who is coming to work present in a meeting and have the leaders from the previous shift discuss with them things that have occurred so that they can be brought up to date. Daily huddles among the physicians. I think I already mentioned the daily huddle that we had with the support physicians to get together and discuss what had been going on during the day and previously. And I really couldn't stress enough how important these became as we moved forward. After you've gotten through the first big wave of go live and support has dwindled away, I think there's some really key things that need to be kept in mind. The first is to convert trained, respected nurses or other, could be even IT or other ancillary folks, into super users. These need to be permanent physician support staff who are available during peak rounding times. And in my experience, having somebody like this who is going to be present from then on to be available for the physicians is absolutely paramount. And every client that I've gone to, I've stressed to them how important that they are. Can't say it enough. It's important to maintain the support structure for several weeks. We generally maintain support total for 4 weeks with a tapering level of support. For example, 100% for the first 2 weeks, 50% for the third week, and perhaps 25% for week 4. This actually needs to be somewhat flexible to see how well things are going. It could be that you could decrease sooner. It may be that you need to keep more support around for a little bit longer. But you probably are not going to need the full 100% level of support for a full 4 weeks. Don't forget that there may be new physicians arriving during the post-go-live time period, such as residents who are rotating through that weren't there for go-live, or new active staff. In addition, you're always going to need ongoing training processes to accommodate new medical staff members as they join the medical staff. So it's wise as part of your training program to develop that post-go-live training strategy at the same time so that you're ready for it. And the last thing is to keep on the lookout for things that may not be real present or real obvious, or even things that you're looking for during the initial stages of go live, but that may show up 3-4 weeks, maybe even a couple of months later. An example given here is that HIM may start to identify that there are more incomplete charts than there were before. And this could be for a number of reasons. Actually, it could be from technical difficulties that are in the system where the physicians feel they're completing their charts, but they're somehow not getting through the system. But I've found that understanding the inbox function or the in-basket function, depending on what it's called, and how to actually complete charts is something that gets glossed over a little bit in training, and the physicians don't quite get the full grasp of how to do it. The other big thing is that their days are already longer than they want them to be because of having to do CPOE, so they may just actually not be completing charts. So this is just one example of something that may not be on your radar when you start go live, but that may pop up later, and you need to be aware of that. So perhaps you'll have some questions when we get to the question and answer section about what I've covered to this point. But I'd like to move on real briefly and tell you just a little bit about Encore's activation program. We've provided activation support services at a number of large to medium-sized organizations, and here's a representative sample of the clients. You may notice that one of them was rather notorious for having a failed implementation of CPOE in the past. It turned into one of our biggest success stories at helping them achieve success with Go Live. But I think that you get a good idea of the spectrum of clients that we've had and been able to help. So what's involved? We start with a project manager whose task it is to lead all the Go Live support activities and tasks, starting well in advance of Go Live and ending as the last support leaves. The resources that you see here include the client super users, staff from the EHR vendor that may be present, physician and non-physician supplemental resources that have been brought in as part of the activation support contract, and this individual will be in charge of managing all of these roles and all of these individuals. In a rare event that a certain resource is not working out, the program manager may actually need to either counsel that individual or, in very rare instances, remove them from the support team. This did happen a couple of times at my last Go Live. It's obviously not something you want to have, but you need to be prepared to do it as well. Encore has connections with many sources of support staff and will take the responsibility of finding qualified staff that will meet the specific needs of the client. For example, support staff will all have familiarity with the EHR system that's being employed. Most will have already supported other Go Lives with that system, so they will be experienced in this type of project. But Encore takes care of the full responsibility of finding the resources and getting them trained and at your site. Program manager will also lead onboarding activities with all the support staff to ensure that they're familiar with the system build and the culture of your organization. As we mentioned earlier, just knowing Epic or Cerner isn't enough usually, because each client has done things in their build and design and even in their culture that's different that need to be taken into account when you have folks support. Program manager will also take care of all scheduling for support shifts and all training. They'll arrange for logistics, including travel, accommodations, and transportation back and forth from the hotel to the site. Trust me, this is a huge undertaking, getting 200 to 300 people to your location, housing them, and making sure that they have transportation to your facility. It truly is an amazing thing to see all these folks appear. And in the instance that I'm most familiar with, I was really blown away by the degree of knowledge and understanding that each of the at-the-elbow support had, even though they came from a wide variety of backgrounds prior to coming on site. I'm sure that we could answer more questions about our support service, but I don't want to turn this into a marketing gig. So I will stop at this point, and if the HISTOC folks have found any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. I'd be also happy to answer any questions you might have if you wanted to contact me directly. The email is there. My cell phone is also listed below. You won't be able to reach me for the next couple of weeks because I'm heading out for a vacation, but the email
Muted.
is a way that you can get.
Unmuted.
I'd be happy to talk with you at any time. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to speak with you.
Thank you, Dr. Sangster. Before we start the Q&A, Encore is giving away a $50 Amazon gift card to a randomly selected attendee. Mr. H., would you like to announce the winner?
Thanks, Lori. The winner of the $50 Amazon gift card is Kathy from Berkshire.
Congratulations, Kathy. We'll email you the gift card at the address you provided in the registration. Now let's move on to the Q&A. As a reminder, you can use the questions panel to submit your questions to Dr. Sangster. Our first question is, what kinds of things do end users struggle with that ATEs can help with?
Well, I think we touched on those a little bit. For physicians, it's usually early on, just simple things like how do I get logged in and things like that. But CPOE, that's what we're here for. Personalizing order sets, personalizing documentation, getting them familiar with how to work their way through the chart. Those are the kind of things that everybody deals with. But I think probably the thing that the specific physician support folks can do is turn the question from what is the functionality in the system that I need to do, what's the button I need to push to make this happen, and change that question to here's what I need to accomplish, how do I do that? And it may be completely different from how they were trained by the site training. So I think if anything, if I had to say one thing, it is that they'll be able to frame the question into a workflow type of question rather than a feature function issue.
Okay. The second question we have is, do ATEs need access to the system?
Do they need access to the system? Well, I think that probably some do, but the majority don't. The general floor support probably don't need access to the system other than perhaps to be able to have a little training through a train domain. But we found that giving the physicians who were there to help support access to the system allowed them to be a lot more helpful. Perhaps not right at the moment that they were dealing with the physician, but during periods of time when they weren't working specifically with a physician, if they have access to the system, they can get in and kind of play with it a little bit and come up with an answer so that the next time they get that question, they can answer better. So I guess I'd have to hedge a little bit and say, in general, No, but you might want to consider giving at least some cadre of super users access to the system so that they could get in and check things out.
We have one last question. Can you describe your ramp down process and why it's structured the way it is?
Ramp down structure, I guess that would be the fact that, as we talked about, that you may have full support for a period of time and then need to decrease it over time. I mean, the reason is that you won't need the whole army that comes the first week for a full 4 weeks. But I think that, as we discussed, being flexible with that and monitoring it on a week-to-week basis to determine what amount of support is needed is what's really helpful. So we kind of go into it planning 100% for the first 2 weeks, 50% the third week, and 25% the fourth week, but with the understanding that those second 2 weeks, if there's still lots of trouble and issues going on, that we could ramp it up and have additional folks available. But if things are just going swimmingly and there's no need to do that, we could call some of those resources off and send them home and save the client some money. So I'm assuming that's what the questioner meant by ramp down. But if that didn't answer the question, please let me know.
Okay, thank you. That was the last question, so this concludes our webinar. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Dr. Sangster, for an informative presentation. Watch your email for a link to the recording of today's webinar as well as a PDF version of the slides. We look forward to seeing you at our next